The Forgotten Battle. The battlefield was silent now, a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Ilana stood alone, the cold wind sweeping across the barren land. Her bright violet eyes scanned the wreckage, searching for something only she could recognize. She clutched a small piece of fabric tightly in her hand, a tattered fragment of a human military insignia. To anyone else, it was just a piece of cloth, but to her, it was a symbol of survival and hope. Years ago, this very place had been a war zone. As a child, Ilana had cowered in fear beneath the ruins while explosions painted the sky in fiery hues. She could still hear the screams, the roar of weapons, and the heavy footsteps of soldiers. But amidst that chaos, one figure stood out, a human soldier who had carried her to safety. She didn't know his name, only his kind eyes and the strength in his voice as he said, "You'll be okay." Now, years later, she was determined to find him. Ilana knelt on the ground, running her fingers through the dirt. The insignia she carried was her only clue, a thread leading her back to the man who had risked everything for her. She whispered to herself, "Where are you, my hero?" Her journey had been long and perilous. She had left her home planet behind, defying her family and the remnants of a society still recovering from the war. Many of her people still distrusted humans, blaming them for the devastation. But Ilana couldn't forget what that soldier had done. He had shown her that not all humans were the enemy. The sound of a distant hum broke her thoughts. She turned sharply, her heart racing. A small hovercraft appeared on the horizon, its engine sputtering as it approached. Ilana quickly hid behind a broken piece of machinery, her breathing steady but her pulse quickening. The war might have ended, but danger still lurked in these forgotten places. The hovercraft landed, and two figures stepped out. They were scavengers, dressed in patched armor and carrying weapons slung over their shoulders. They began rummaging through the wreckage, searching for anything of value. Ilana watched silently, hoping they wouldn't spot her. She wasn't ready to reveal her presence. Not yet. One of the scavengers kicked a piece of debris, revealing a rusted metal container. They opened it eagerly, pulling out a dusty old map. "Looks like some kind of coordinates," one of them said, his voice gruff. "Bet this leads to something good." Ilana's ears perked up. A map. Could it be connected to the soldier she was searching for? She had to know. As the scavengers argued over the map, Ilana devised a plan. She waited until they were distracted, then crept closer, her movements silent and precise. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached their hovercraft. She knew she only had one chance. With a swift motion, she grabbed a small tracker from her pocket and attached it to the craft's underside. Just as she turned to leave, the gravel beneath her foot shifted, making a soft crunch. The scavengers froze. "Did you hear that?" one of them said, raising his weapon. Ilana ducked behind a large piece of metal, her breath caught in her throat. The scavengers began to search the area, their steps growing closer. She clenched her fists, ready to defend herself if necessary. But before they could find her, a loud crash echoed from another part of the wreckage. The scavengers turned, distracted by the noise. It was her chance. Ilana slipped away, her heart racing as she moved deeper into the shadows. She watched from a safe distance as the scavengers climbed back into their hovercraft and took off, taking the map with them. But she wasn't worried. The tracker would lead her right to them. As the hovercraft disappeared into the horizon, Ilana stood and brushed the dust from her clothes. She looked at the insignia in her hand, her resolve stronger than ever. The soldier who had saved her all those years ago was out there, and she was closer than ever to finding him. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, her voice carried away by the wind. She turned and began walking, leaving the battlefield behind. The past was gone, but it had left her with a purpose, and she wouldn't stop until she fulfilled it. The search begins. Ilana's journey had only just begun, but the weight of it already pressed heavily on her. With the tracker securely in place, she followed the scavenger's hovercraft through the vast, barren wastelands that stretched across the old war zones. The sky above was painted in streaks of orange and gray, remnants of pollution from battles long past. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional crackle of her old navigation device. Her small, rugged transport ship flew low, blending with the terrain to avoid detection. As she trailed the scavengers, her mind wandered back to the fleeting memory of her savior, the human soldier who had appeared like a guardian angel during her darkest moment. She could still recall the strength in his arms as he carried her, the way he shielded her from danger without hesitation. But his face was blurry now, fading with time. All she had left was the insignia and a name that eluded her grasp. The tracker pinged softly, pulling her out of her thoughts. She checked the screen. The scavengers had stopped near an old outpost, one of the many abandoned stations left to decay after the war. Yelena's ship landed a safe distance away, hidden behind a ridge of jagged rocks. From her vantage point, she could see the scavengers unloading their gear and entering the crumbling building. "This is it," she whispered to herself, tightening the straps of her satchel. Inside were the few tools she carried: a small plasma cutter, a holographic recorder, and a compact energy pistol she hoped she wouldn't have to use. Yelena approached the outpost cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick dust coating the ground. The structure loomed ahead, its walls cracked and covered in strange markings from long-forgotten conflicts. She slipped inside through a side entrance, her senses on high alert. The interior was dimly lit, with beams of sunlight piercing through holes in the roof. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. She followed the sound of voices, careful to stay hidden. The scavengers were gathered around a console, trying to decipher the map they had found. "This place used to be a supply depot," one of them said, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "If these coordinates are right, there's a stash of tech buried here, maybe even weapons. Or it's just junk," another replied gruffly. "Either way, we sell what we find. Let's just get this over with." Yelena's heart raced as she watched from the shadows. The map they had could be her key to finding Aaron Hale, the soldier she sought. But how could she get it without risking a confrontation? The scavengers were armed, and she was outnumbered. As they continued their work, she noticed one of them set the map on a nearby table while inspecting a terminal. It was now or never. Silently, she moved closer, her footsteps as light as a whisper. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the map. But just as she grabbed it, the console emitted a loud beep. What was that? One of the scavengers barked, spinning around. His eyes locked onto Yelena. "Hey, who the hell are you?" Before she could think, Yelena bolted. The scavengers shouted and gave chase, their boots pounding against the metal floor. She sprinted down the corridor, clutching the map tightly to her chest. Her mind raced, calculating her next move. She had studied the outpost's layout before arriving. There was an emergency hatch near the east wing. Blaster shots echoed behind her, striking the walls and sending sparks flying. Yelena ducked and weaved, her adrenaline pushing her forward. She reached the hatch and slammed her hand on the control panel. The door hissed open just as the scavengers rounded the corner. "There she is. Don't let her escape." Yelena dived through the hatch, tumbling into the open wasteland outside. The scavengers were close behind, but she had one advantage. They didn't know the terrain as well as she did. She sprinted toward the jagged rocks where her ship was hidden, zigzagging to avoid becoming an easy target. Blaster fire zipped past her, but she didn't stop. Her breath came in short gasps as she reached the ridge and scrambled up the rocks. Her ship's cockpit came into view, and she practically threw herself inside. The engines roared to life as she activated the controls. The scavengers reached the ridge just in time to see her ship lifting off, their shouts of frustration drowned out by the roar of the engines. Yelena allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but she knew this was far from over. Once she was safely in orbit, she examined the map. It wasn't just a set of coordinates, it also contained encrypted notes, likely left by the original owner. The notes mentioned a hidden bunker, one that had been used as a safe haven during the war. It was a long shot, but it was her best lead yet. "This has to be it," Ilana muttered, her determination solidifying. She set a course for the bunker, her heart pounding with anticipation. Every step brought her closer to finding Aaron Hale, the man who had saved her life and unknowingly shaped her destiny. Little did she know, someone else was watching. A shadowy figure on a distant ship observed her progress through a monitor, a sinister smile spreading across their face. "She's getting too close," they murmured. Time to intervene. The search for her hero was no longer just her mission. It had become a race against unseen forces. Ilana was prepared to fight for answers, but the dangers ahead would test her resolve like never before. The soldier's name. Ilana's fingers trembled as she studied the map in front of her. The coordinates were clear, but what lay beyond them was still a mystery. She had crossed vast stretches of hostile terrain, navigating through decaying war zones and evading enemy patrols, but nothing compared to the weight of this next step. The hidden bunker was located on a remote quarantine planet, a place no one had dared to visit since the war's end. It was the last place anyone would look, but that made it the perfect hiding spot for someone trying to remain unseen. Her ship soared through the stars, its engines humming softly as the lights of distant galaxies danced outside the window. The journey would take several days, but Ilana didn't mind. She needed time to think. She needed time to prepare for what lay ahead. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that day, to the soldier who had saved her when everything seemed lost. As she sat alone in the cockpit, Ilana recalled the chaos of that battle, the thunderous explosions, the flashing lights, the smoke that swallowed the sky. She had been no older than 12 when the war reached her home, and her life had been a whirlwind of fear and confusion ever since. But that one moment when the soldier had carried her to safety remained etched in her memory like a lifeline. "He must still be out there," she whispered to herself. The insignia in her hand was all she had left to connect her to him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something more than just his face. It was as though a piece of the puzzle was hidden, locked away in the depths of her mind. The stars began to blur as her ship entered the atmosphere of the quarantine planet. The air was thick with the remnants of war, a harsh reminder of the destruction that had once claimed this place. As Ilana descended toward the surface, her ship's systems flickered with static. She checked the controls, her heart rate picking up. Something wasn't right. "Not now," she muttered under her breath, quickly toggling through the ship's diagnostics. The comm system was down, and the sensors were glitching. Her heart sank. If the ship couldn't get a clear signal, she might miss whatever trace the soldier had left behind. With no time to lose, Ilana set the ship down on the planet's surface, near the coordinates marked on the map. The landscape before her was a blend of desolation and decay. Ruins of old military bunkers and supply depots half buried in the dirt, their walls riddled with the scars of battle. The air was thick with dust, and the wind carried a haunting whisper, as if the planet itself were mourning the horrors it had witnessed. She stepped out of the ship, her boots crunching on the dry earth as she surveyed the area. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the hidden bunker. The scavengers from before had mentioned finding valuable tech in this area, but Ilana had a different purpose. She wasn't here for relics or weapons. She was here for the soldier who had saved her life. As she trekked across the barren land, her thoughts shifted to the human soldier once again. His name had remained elusive, buried beneath layers of confusion and time. He had never spoken much, but there was one word she remembered him saying: Hale. She wasn't sure if it was his last name or a call sign, but it was a starting point. The mystery of his identity began to unravel, but the deeper she dug, the more questions arose. After several hours of searching, Ilana finally stumbled upon a hidden entrance, partially concealed beneath the rubble of a collapsed building. The metallic door was sealed shut, but a faint flicker of light from within gave her hope. She approached cautiously, her hand resting on the hilt of her plasma cutter. With a quick motion, she activated the device and began slicing through the door's lock. The door groaned as it slowly creaked open, revealing a narrow passage leading into the heart of the bunker. Ilana stepped inside, her boots echoing against the cold metal floor. The air was stale, and the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. She activated a flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. The walls of the bunker were lined with old data terminals, their screens dark and lifeless. But one terminal in the far corner flickered to life as she approached. The screen displayed a name, Aaron Hale. Her heart skipped a beat. Aaron Hale, she whispered, the name familiar yet strange on her tongue. She hadn't expected to find this much. She quickly accessed the terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys as she searched through its archives. What she found confirmed what she had feared. The soldier she was searching for had been more than just a hero. He had been part of a classified military operation, a high-ranking officer who had disappeared after the war. The files on the terminal were encrypted, but Ilana had learned to crack codes in her time as a survivor. She worked quickly, her mind racing with the possibility that this was the moment she had been waiting for. As the encryption broke, the screen displayed a series of messages, reports, orders, and final commands. The last message was dated just before his disappearance. Operation Elysium. Captain Aaron Hale to be extracted. Objective: to protect and transport the last of the alien refugees to a secure location. Final report: mission completed. Ilana's breath caught in her throat. The mission. He had been tasked with protecting refugees, alien survivors like her. Her mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her memory. The soldier had been part of a larger operation, one that had involved saving her kind. And now it seemed that his story was intertwined with hers in ways she hadn't imagined. But why had he disappeared? And why had no one come looking for him? Before Ilana could process the information, a sudden noise echoed through the bunker. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. She quickly shut down the terminal and turned off her flashlight, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone else was here. The hidden colony. Ilana's pulse raced as she crouched behind the thick wall of rock, peering out into the dense jungle beyond. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of alien creatures echoed in the distance. It was a far cry from the desolate, war-torn landscapes she had grown accustomed to. This was a place of life, of rebirth, hidden from the prying eyes of the galaxy. Yet it felt alien to her, a safe haven, but also a place where secrets were kept. She adjusted her gear, securing her plasma cutter to her belt. The coordinates had led her here, to a hidden human colony on the quarantine planet. It was said to be a place where former soldiers and refugees had taken refuge, away from the wars and the politics of the galaxy. But what Ilana wasn't prepared for was the isolation and the tension that clung to this place. It wasn't just the jungle that was keeping people away. It was the people themselves. The colony had been built into the side of a large cliff, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. She had followed the trail through dense foliage, avoided traps, and eluded patrols. But now, as she stood at the edge of the colony's outer perimeter, she could feel the weight of her mission. She wasn't just here to find Aaron Hale. She was here to find out why he had disappeared, and what secrets he was hiding. The towering walls of the colony came into view. They were fortified, with high-tech security systems scanning every individual who approached. Ilana had to be careful. This was no ordinary place. The people here were survivors, hardened by war, and not easily trusting of outsiders. If she wanted to gain entry, she would need to play their game. She glanced around, her gaze landing on a small trading post just beyond the gates. It looked like a place where people came to barter for supplies, perhaps even with the colony's inhabitants. Ilana's heart quickened as she made her way toward it, moving with purpose but keeping a low profile. At the post, a gruff man with a long scar across his cheek was haggling with an alien merchant. The air was thick with the smell of spices, machinery, and the faint scent of a distant fire. Gilana's instincts told her that this was her best chance to blend in without raising suspicion. She approached cautiously, speaking to the merchant in the broken language of traders that she had picked up over the years. "I need supplies," she said in a hushed tone. "And information. I'm looking for someone." The merchant, a tall creature with iridescent skin, looked her over with suspicion. He tilted his head, considering her request. "Everyone's looking for someone these days," the merchant replied in a gravelly voice. "Who are you after?" Ilana hesitated for a moment. She couldn't reveal too much, especially not to a stranger, but she needed to find a way in. "I'm looking for a soldier," she said carefully. "A human. His name is Aaron Hale. He was part of the resistance during the war." The merchant's eyes narrowed. His gaze flicked to the scared man at the stall next door, who was watching them closely. The merchant's hand moved slowly to the edge of his stall, where a small device sat, likely a hidden communication system. "You're not the first to ask about him," the merchant said quietly, "but you might be the last." Ilana's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The merchant leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Hale disappeared years ago. Some say he's dead. Others think he's hiding here, in the colony. But no one's seen him in ages. There are rumors, dark ones. People who want him found, and people who want him gone." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Ilana could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Could it be true? Had the soldier she had been searching for all this time been hiding in plain sight? Before she could respond, the scared man at the next stall moved closer, his hand resting on the hilt of a weapon. The merchant stiffened, giving Ilana a quick glance before gesturing toward the exit. "Leave now," he said softly. "I'll cover for you, but don't come back here." Confused and grateful, Ilana nodded and stepped away, retreating into the shadows of the jungle before she could be seen. Her mind raced with the new information. The possibility that Aaron Hale had been living in the colony, hidden from everyone, perhaps even from himself. It was then that Ilana knew she had to gain access to the heart of the colony. But how? The security was tight, and the people here were fiercely protective of their secrets. If Aaron was here, he didn't want to be found. Of that much, Ilana was certain. She spent the next few days in the outskirts of the colony, observing from a distance. The walls were high and well guarded, with only a few points of entry. There were no open gates, no easy way in. But Ilana wasn't easily deterred. Her mind was focused on one goal: to find Aaron Hale and uncover the truth. Her patience paid off when she discovered a small, unmarked entrance at the back of the colony. It was hidden behind dense foliage and an old communications tower, one that appeared to be out of service. It was risky, but it was her only option. One evening, as the colony settled into darkness, Ilana made her move. She approached the entrance quietly, her breath steady. She knew that once she entered, there would be no turning back. The shadow of the past was waiting for her, and the truth about the man who had saved her would finally be revealed. But as she stepped across the threshold, a strange feeling washed over her. Something wasn't right. The air seemed too still, too quiet. Ilana's instincts screamed that she wasn't alone. Just as she reached for the control panel to open the door, a figure stepped out from the darkness. "Looking for someone?" the figure asked, his voice low and cold. Ilana froze. It was him. The confrontation. Ilana stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the figure before her stepped out from the shadows. The air seemed to thicken around her, each breath she took feeling heavier than the last. She couldn't believe her eyes, standing right in front of her, as if summoned by the very depths of her longing, was the man she had been searching for all this time. But there was no joy in the reunion, only tension. The man's dark eyes were narrowed, and his posture was rigid with suspicion. He wore the tattered uniform of a soldier, though it had clearly seen better days. His face was lined with years of hardship, the youthful features she once imagined now hardened by the weight of survival. But even with the graying beard and deep scars that marred his skin, Ilana recognized him instantly. Aaron Hale. She whispered, almost afraid to speak the name aloud, as if the very mention of it would make him vanish into thin air. "It's really you." For a moment, there was only silence between them, the distant hum of the colony's power grid the only sound breaking the tension. Aaron's gaze didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder. He took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning her up and down. There was something unreadable in his expression: anger, fear, or perhaps just weariness. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and gruff, carrying an edge of something she couldn't place. "Who are you to come here? To disturb me?" Ilana took a step closer, despite the growing chill in the air. She couldn't help herself. She needed him to understand. "I'm the girl you saved all those years ago, the one you pulled out of that battle. You carried me to safety when everything was falling apart." Aaron's expression faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly masked it. "I didn't ask for your gratitude," he muttered, his eyes darting around them, as if searching for an escape. "That was a long time ago. You shouldn't have come." The harsh words stung more than Ilana expected. She had imagined this moment countless times, dreamed of finding him, of thanking him for the kindness he had shown her when no one else would. But the man standing before her was not the hero she remembered. He was something different, broken, hiding, and angry at a world that had left him with nothing but memories. "I didn't come to thank you," Ilana said, her voice steady, though the weight of emotion threatened to break through. "I came to find you because I need answers. I need to know what happened to you, why you disappeared, what happened to the mission." Aaron's face hardened at her words. "It doesn't matter. It's over. There's no mission anymore, no glory in what we did." His hands clenched into fists, his voice rising. "I failed. I couldn't save everyone." Ilana's heart clenched at his words. She saw the pain hidden beneath the anger, the guilt that had been festering in him for all these years. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. "You didn't fail, Aaron. You saved me. And that's enough." Aaron's eyes met hers then, and for the first time, Ilana saw something like a flicker of recognition in them, something raw and vulnerable. But it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight with restraint. "You don't know what I've done. You don't know the things I've seen, the people I couldn't save, the lives I took. I'm not the man you think I am." Ilana felt a pang in her chest. She had always admired this man, the soldier who had rescued her, who had fought for a cause greater than himself. But now, standing before her, he was nothing like the hero she had imagined. He was a man broken by war, haunted by the past, and desperate to forget the very things that had made him who he was. "Aaron," she said softly, her voice filled with compassion, "I know the war changed you. I know it changed all of us. But the soldier who saved me isn't gone. He's still in there, and I need your help. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to find the truth." Aaron's gaze faltered for a moment, his walls cracking just enough to let a sliver of vulnerability show. He turned away, his shoulders tense, and walked toward the edge of the small clearing they were standing in. Ilana could see the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him, the internal battle raging behind his guarded expression. "You're wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. There's nothing left for you to find." But Ilana was unwavering. "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth. Why did you vanish? Why did you give up on everything? We can still make a difference, Aaron. We can still change the galaxy." His shoulders stiffened at her words, and for a long moment, Ilana thought he might walk away, leaving her with nothing but more unanswered questions. But then, to her surprise, Aaron turned back toward her. His face was pale, but his eyes were clearer than before, his gaze focused, not just on her, but on something deeper, something buried within himself. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered, almost as if to himself. "The mission was meant to save people, alien refugees, humans, anyone who needed help. But after everything that happened, I couldn't live with the decisions I made, the lives I took to protect the few. Ilana took a step forward, her voice full of determination. You did what you had to do. You were a soldier. You protected us. And you saved me. But you can't keep running from the past, Aaron. It's time to face it. It's time to make things right. Aaron's face softened for a fleeting moment, as if he were considering her words, but then, just as quickly, he turned away again. I'm not the man you remember. I'm not a hero anymore. Ilana reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. Maybe not, but you're still the man who saved me, and that's a start. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, Aaron's shoulders sagged. He didn't pull away. Instead, he nodded, his voice hoarse as he spoke. All right, he said, his gaze now meeting hers with a resolve she hadn't seen before. I'll tell you everything. But be prepared for the truth. It's not what you want to hear. Ilana nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and uncertainty. She had found him, the soldier who had saved her. And now, together, they would face the past, no matter how dark it might be. But as Aaron began to speak, Ilana couldn't shake the feeling that the journey ahead would lead them both into even greater danger than they had ever known. The truth unveiled, the silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken words, as Aaron stared out into the dense jumble beyond the colony's walls. Ilana remained by his side, her hand still resting on his arm, offering silent comfort. He had agreed to talk, but the weight of his past clearly hung over him like an impenetrable cloud. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if waiting for the right moment to speak. Finally, Aaron took a deep breath, the lines on his face deepening as he began to unravel the story he had buried for so long. I was part of a secret mission, Operation Elysium, Aaron started, his voice barely above a whisper. It was meant to be a last-ditch effort, a plan to save those who had no place in the new world that was being rebuilt after the war. The government called it a cleanup mission. We were sent in to evacuate alien refugees and human dissidents who had been targeted by the military. But things went wrong. Everything went wrong. Ilana listened closely, her heart racing as he spoke. This was the truth she had been searching for, the answer to why Aaron had disappeared from the world, why he had chosen to live in exile. She could hear the pain in his voice as he continued. We were ambushed on our way to the drop zone. Outnumbered, outgunned. We lost most of our squad in the first wave of fire, but somehow, I kept going. I had to. Aaron's voice cracked slightly, but he quickly regained control. I remember seeing the faces of the refugees we were supposed to save, terrified, begging for help. But we didn't have enough time. We couldn't save them all. Ilana could see the pain etched in his features as he spoke, the guilt that had consumed him for years. She knew that this wasn't just about the mission. It was about the people he couldn't save, the choices he had made in the heat of battle, choices that had haunted him ever since. And then there was you, Aaron continued, his eyes locking with hers for the first time since they had met again. You were just a child, caught in the crossfire. I should have left you. I should have kept moving. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave you to die. The admission struck Ilana like a physical blow. She had never known that the soldier who had saved her had faced that kind of decision, had risked his life for her when there was no guarantee of survival. She had always thought of him as a hero, but now she saw the weight he carried. The choice to save her had cost him, and he had never let it go. I thought I could make up for it, Aaron continued, his eyes distant, lost in the past. But after that day, everything fell apart. The operation failed. The refugees were slaughtered. And I couldn't live with the fact that I couldn't protect everyone. I was supposed to be their protector, but I failed. Ilana stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You didn't fail. You saved me. You saved me when no one else would. And that matters. Aaron shook his head, his face a mask of regret. You don't understand. The guilt never goes away. I lost everything. My team, the mission, the trust of the people I was supposed to protect. So I ran. I disappeared, hoping that if I just faded into the shadows, I could forget. But every time I think about it, every time I remember, I see their faces, and I can't stop thinking about the ones I couldn't save. Alanna could see the weight of his words, the emotional toll they had taken on him over the years. The soldier who had once been so sure of his purpose was now a man broken by the consequences of war. She had always thought of him as invincible, as the one who could do no wrong, but now she understood the real cost of his bravery. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice filled with empathy. "But you can't keep running from the past. You saved me, Aaron. And you gave me the strength to survive when I thought there was no hope left. You can't keep punishing yourself for the choices you made. None of us are perfect." For a long moment, Aaron said nothing. He stood still, as if lost in thought, his gaze distant. But slowly, something shifted in him. His shoulders relaxed just slightly, and his clenched fists uncrossed. He looked at Alanna, and for the first time in years, he seemed to see her not as a reminder of his failures, but as a person who had been shaped by his actions. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice softer now. "Maybe I've been running for too long." Alanna gave him a small, encouraging smile. "You don't have to carry this alone, Aaron. You don't have to do it by yourself anymore. We're not alone. Not anymore." Aaron seemed to wrestle with the idea, his mind clearly turning over her words. Alanna knew that it wouldn't be easy for him to forgive himself, but she also knew that he had taken the first step by opening up. There was still so much to face, so much left unsaid, but at least now, there was a chance to move forward. Just as Alanna was about to speak again, a noise interrupted them. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from behind. Alanna's heart skipped a beat as she turned, sensing the danger before she even saw the figure. A shadow loomed at the entrance to the clearing, tall and menacing. A figure, cloaked in the darkness of the jungle, stood there, watching them intently. Alanna's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. Her hand instinctively moved to the hilt of her plasma cutter, but Aaron stopped her with a single motion. "It's them," he muttered under his breath, his face darkening. "They found us." Alanna felt the weight of his words. The past had finally caught up with them. The danger that Aaron had been running from had come to claim him once more. The figure stepped into the light, revealing not one, but 3 armed men, each one wearing the same insignia that Alanna had seen on the soldiers during the war. But these men were not soldiers of justice. They were hunters, and they had come for Aaron. "You're coming with us," the leader said, his voice cold and commanding. "It's time to face the consequences of your actions. A new mission." The tension in the clearing was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. Alanna's eyes locked onto the 3 armed men who had appeared from the shadows. The moment was heavy with the weight of Aaron's past, but now the present demanded action. The men were closing in, their weapons raised, and Alanna knew that if they didn't act fast, everything they had fought for could be lost. Aaron stepped forward, his posture tense but steady. He was no longer the man haunted by his failures, at least not entirely. There was a fire in his eyes now, a sense of resolve that had been missing for years. He wasn't going to run anymore, not from the past, not from these men. "You've come for me, haven't you?" Aaron's voice was low, but his words carried the weight of a man ready to face whatever came next. "What do you want with me?" The leader of the group, a tall man with dark sunglasses and a scar that ran from his cheek down to his jaw, sneered. "You've been running long enough, Hale. The higher-ups don't like loose ends. You know that better than anyone." Alanna could feel the tension rising as the men took a step forward, their weapons aimed in their direction. She reached for the plasma cutter at her side, but Aaron's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist gently but firmly. "Don't," he said quietly, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "This is my fight." Alanna hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to act. But she could see the change in Aaron. The man who had once hidden from his past, the one who had been so willing to disappear, was finally standing tall. He wasn't just facing his demons, he was ready to confront them head-on. The leader of the hunters motioned for his men to spread out. "You're coming with us, Hale," he said, his voice icy. "We'll take you back to the council, and they'll decide your fate." Aaron took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, Ailana saw the full extent of his strength. It wasn't just physical, it was the strength to face the truth, to fight for something bigger than himself. He didn't have to go back to the council. He didn't have to let them decide his fate. "You're wrong," Aaron said, his voice louder now, filled with conviction. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Without warning, he lunged forward, his body moving with the fluidity of someone who had once been trained for this very kind of battle. The leader barely had time to react before Aaron disarmed him, knocking the weapon from his hand and sending it flying across the clearing. The remaining 2 hunters hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Aaron's swift actions. Ailana didn't waste a second. She sprinted toward the nearest hunter, her plasma cutter drawn. A quick jab to the chest rendered the weapon useless, and with a swift twist, she incapacitated him. The 3rd hunter, realizing they were outmatched, backed away, his eyes wide with panic. "You're making a big mistake," the leader warned, his voice shaking with frustration. "You can't run forever, Hale. The council won't stop looking for you." Aaron stood tall, his chest heaving with effort, but his expression unwavering. "The council can go to hell," he said, his voice low and full of finality. "I'm not their puppet anymore." Ailana turned to Aaron, her eyes meeting his with a silent understanding. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about reclaiming their futures, about taking control of their own destinies. The galaxy had been shaped by war, but it didn't have to remain that way. Together, they could make a difference. The leader of the hunters, seeing that his crew was defeated, growled in frustration. "This isn't over," he spat, retreating into the jungle with his remaining men. "You'll regret this, Hale. You'll all regret this." Aaron watched them disappear into the trees, his face hardening with determination. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't running from what he had done or from who he had become. "Thank you," Aaron said quietly, turning to Ailana. His voice was thick with emotion. "You've given me a chance to fight back, to finally do something that matters." Ailana gave him a small smile, the weight of the moment settling over her like a comforting cloak. "We're in this together, Aaron. You don't have to fight alone anymore." Aaron nodded, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. "I know." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the clearing as the 2 of them stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the battle they had just fought. It was a small victory, but it was a start. There was still so much to be done. The council, the hunters, and all the forces of the past that sought to control the galaxy. They would come for them again. But now, Aaron had something he hadn't had in years. Purpose. "We can't stay here," Ailana said, looking around at the jungle that surrounded them. "They'll be back." Aaron nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to find a safe place, somewhere we can plan. But first, we need to make sure the people we're fighting for, those who were left behind, know they're not alone. There's a resistance, a real one, and it starts with us." Ailana felt a surge of something deep inside her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about change. It was about bringing hope back to a galaxy that had long been ravaged by war. Aaron turned to her, his gaze steady. "We fight for them, Ailana. For the ones who don't have anyone else. For the people who believe that maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance for peace." Ailana smiled, her resolve hardening. "Then let's get started." Together, they walked toward the horizon, ready to face whatever challenges the future would bring. They weren't just 2 survivors anymore. They were the beginning of something bigger, a movement that would change the galaxy, one person at a time. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Ilana knew that the true mission was just beginning.